Hey guys, Will here. So we're back again today with what I think must be the most requested video so far for 2023. We finally have the Asetek SimSports La Prima bundle here, including the wheel, the 12 Newton meter wheelbase, and their load cell pedal. So what we're gonna be doing in today's video is taking a look at this from a driver's perspective, letting you know what it's like to actually drive with these products compared to some other alternatives in the market, as well as compared to their other products which are available in their own ecosystem. So they've got their Invicta, which is their top of the line stuff, their Forte, which is in the middle, and then La Prima, which sits at the bottom. But as you'll see as we get through today's video, they haven't sacrificed actual build quality to provide a cheaper price point here. All they're doing is just removing features which you may or may not need. That's what we're gonna be exploring in today's video. So let's get going. Okay, so before we kick off here today, firstly, a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Micro Center. Now, if you're in the US, you may already be familiar with Micro Center as an absolute mecca when it comes to all sorts of gadgets, electronics, and PC hardware. What you might not know is that they also sell an expanding range of sim racing hardware, including Asetek's gears. So this is really exciting because it means if you visit one of their stores, you can actually get to see these products and in some cases even get hands-on experience with these products before parting with your hard-earned cash. So if you visit the description down below, you'll find a link to get yourself $25 off your purchase of $100 or more if you visit one of their stores. And there's also the opportunity to redeem a 128 gigabyte flash drive when you sign up for early access to their brand new store opening in Charlotte in early 2024. So check them out via the links down in the description or visit your local Micro Center today. So while we're on the subject of sponsorships and things like that, now is a perfect time to also just explain the full context of exactly what you're watching today. So firstly, a big thank you to Asetek SimSports for sending across their La Prima bundle for us to check out today. They have also provided us previously with their Forte and their Invicta gear to check out, and we've already done review videos of those, which I would encourage you to check out via the links down in the description below. We will be referencing them quite a bit throughout today's video. Now, we'll also be comparing against a bunch of other manufacturers' gear as well. So it's important that you guys know that all the gear that we're going to be looking at in today's video was all provided under exactly the same conditions by the various different manufacturers. So as is always the case here at Boosted Media, no third party has any sort of input or any sort of creative control into what we're doing today. Everything we're going to be sharing is just purely our own experiences and my own personal opinions. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that we talk about in today's video, there will be some links down in the description below as well. Those are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you if you find what we do here of value. Now, just for absolute 100% complete transparency with you guys, you also need to be aware that Asetek SimSports do sponsor some of our racing videos here on the channel. Now, we do keep that completely separate and independent from our review process. So if you are wanting to understand more about this kind of stuff, there's a link down in the description below as well to an article called How Boosted Media Makes Money and Why It Matters. I would definitely encourage you to check that out just so you understand exactly how all of this stuff works. So as always, I'll be sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly with you guys today, but I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of that relationship before we get started on today's review. So let's start off here today talking about pricing. So there's two different configuration options available. Now, the La Prima gear is only available through Asetek SimSports directly. There is a Tony Kanaan edition of the La Prima base, the La Prima pedals, and the Forte wheel available exclusively through Micro Center as well. There will also be some upgrade kits available through Asetek SimSports reseller network, and that's going to allow you to step up some of the componentry to higher spec systems. So it's quite a modular system that we have here. We're going to run through that in a little bit of detail today, but a lot of that was covered in our Invicta review. So we're going to sort of try to keep this as top level as we can today, and I will reference that Invicta review video a few times throughout this for things where you can get more detail if you're wanting to dig deeper into all of this. So two different packages available through Asetek SimSports here. You've got the bundle as we see it on the table now with the 12 Newton meter base, the La Prima wheel, and the La Prima brake and throttle combo. That comes in at $1,349.99 US dollars or €1,134.44. Now those prices don't include any taxes or shipping, so just make sure that you're checking the details for your local area for all of that as well. It is very difficult to compare these products against other competitors because some include taxes in their pricing, some include shipping, some don't. So I would definitely recommend do your own research here, but we'll make a couple of little references here as we go through today's video, just so you got a better understanding of roughly where this is sitting in the market. So that's the pedal and wheel and base bass combo. You then also do have a wheel and bass combination available too. So if you decide that the La Prima pedals aren't for you, and they aren't going to suit everybody, as you'll understand by the end of today's video, then you do have the option to just buy these two together. You don't have to buy the pedals and then try to sell them if you don't like these pedals. So that comes in at $1,049.99 US dollars, or 882.34 euros. So effectively you're paying 300 US dollars more for these pedals. The pedals are available as a standalone product if you wanted to buy those though, and those come in at 399.99 US dollars, or 336.13 euro if you were wanting to buy them as a standalone. So if you think you might like these pedals, it probably would be smart to buy them in the bundle, and if you decide you don't like them, then you might even end up being able to sell them for a little bit more than what you paid for them in the bundle, or equivalent pricing wise anyway. So definitely consider that as an option, but you'll see in today's video, we'll go through and we'll explain the reasons why you may or may not like these pedals specifically. So just for comparison purposes here, if you compare this to Acertech's Forte bundle, which comes with a Forte wheel, Forte pedals, and 18 Newton meter Forte bass, that comes in at 2,000 US dollars, or 1,999.99, or 1,680.66 euro. Or if you step it up to the Invicta bundle, which includes their Invicta hydraulic pedals and the Invicta 27 Newton meter wheelbase, but still the Forte wheel, that comes in at 2,849.99 US dollars, or 2,394.95 euros. So what that effectively means is you're paying about half for this bundle over what you'd be paying for the Invicta bundle if you wanted to go down that path. And as you'll see in today's video, the actual driving experience, there's no way the Invicta is twice as good as what this is. So I think that this does represent very good value for money. Now, just for reference here, as well as I crouch down under the table, if you were looking at a Moza R12 and KS wheel, you'd be looking at around about 20% less money for this as opposed to the La Prima wheel and bass bundle. So we will be doing some direct comparisons in today's video between the driving experience with both of these bundles, just to give you an idea. But yeah, 20% or so less for the Moza stuff, depending again on where you buy it from. So it's definitely worth shopping around, making sure you're getting the absolute best price. We do have some discount codes available down in the description for these guys as well, if you were interested in these. Now, it's important while we're on the subject of pricing to also quickly touch on mounting too. Now, Acertech thankfully do include some T-nuts and mounting hardware in the box for the wheelbase as well as the pedals. The pedals are pretty straightforward. They'll just bolt directly onto your aluminium profile rig. Now, if you have a rig that has some sort of a pedal plate, a lot of rig manufacturers are still catching up with the new Acertech ecosystem. So you may find that you have to drill holes in your pedal plate to mount these pedals. Not a huge deal, certainly not a deal breaker, but just something to keep in mind there. Most rig manufacturers will publish on their website what exact hardware is compatible with their cockpit. So you should have a good understanding of what you're getting into. So just make sure you do your due diligence there as well. Now, we mentioned before the Invicta wheelbase review, which took you through all the various different mounting brackets and options available, which are also compatible with this. So I'm not going to run you through all of those again now, but I will just quickly point out there are some T-slot channels on the bottom of the unit here. Those unfortunately aren't the same spacing as what you get with Moza and Fanatec. So again, you may just have to drill some holes in your wheel deck depending on what rig you have, or look at one of the Acertech mounts. So just make sure again that you do your own research there, so you don't find yourself in a pickle if you buy one of these and you find yourself unable to mount it. So let's now take a deeper dive into the hardware, starting with the wheelbases, and we'll have a look at the wheels and pedals and the differences between those two. So the first thing you'll notice here is that the La Prima and the Forte are exactly the same physical size as each other. The Invicta base is quite a bit larger there. You can see it sticks out quite a bit further on the back there. We'll put some measurements up on the screen for you now so you can see the exact measurements, but it is quite a bit heftier. But if we're comparing against the Moza R12, once again, you can see this guy is quite a bit smaller and shallower than what we have with the La Prima, which may be something that's important to you if you're wanting to have your screen mounted very, very closely behind the base. So I thought it was worth just pointing that out. Same kind of output level here with 12 Newton meters of peak force, but quite a bit smaller on the Moza R12. Now, the next thing you're going to notice here is that the build quality across all three of these is identical, regardless of the fact that the price is so much lower on the La Prima. And that is something that has really impressed me here. I really like the approach that they've taken to omitting hardware elements or features that you might not necessarily want, in lieu of making sacrifices in terms of build quality. So in terms of features that have been removed here, you might notice that the La Prima base has no LED strips on it at all. The Forte base has 4 LED strips, 1 on each side and 2 along the top. And the Invicta base has 2 on each side and 2 along the top. So that may or may not be something that's important to you. Now for me personally, I keep these LEDs off on both the Invicta and the Forte, but they are looking at integrating some pretty cool features with these RGB LED strips. So things like flag LEDs, spotters, and those kinds of integrated things. So you get a visual representation of what's going on the track around you. So it isn't purely just for aesthetics. There is a functional purpose for these as well, although it isn't integrated in the software just yet. So if we move the Invicta base out of the way here and spin the Forte and the La Prima bases around, one thing you will notice in addition to the lack of LED strips is the interface on the back here. So you'll notice there is no socket here for the emergency stop button. So you can't actually purchase that as an upgrade for the La Prima, which I'm a little bit disappointed about. I was hoping that it might just simply be a case of they don't include the button inside the box for the emergency stop, but no, there isn't actually a physical port there for you to connect that to, which is a little bit disappointing. They do include the same physical on-off button as you get with the La Prima and the Invicta bases though. Now you might be wondering what's the difference between a power button and an emergency stop button. The power button will actually cut power entirely to the wheelbase, which means that it will disconnect it from your PC, and depending on the sim racing title that you're running, you may have to actually quit out of the game and then come back in again to make that reconnect, whereas the emergency stop button is simply just cutting off the torque to the base. So the base still remains connected to the PC, but the wheel just goes completely dead and there's no torque delivered at all. So look, for a 12 Newton meter wheelbase, I do think that it's a good idea to at least have the provision for a emergency stop button. It's one of those things that you don't need until you need. And I've only ever had to use an emergency stop button a handful of times, maybe twice in the years that I've been doing this. But in one of those cases, it did actually stop me from completely tearing up the USB cable on one of my wheels. And yeah, that was a very close near miss. So thankfully, we do have the new quick release mechanism, which we're going to be looking at probably in a separate video, I would say, which has an integrated USB interface, which means you don't have to have a cable tethered back to your PC. You can actually run it directly through the wheelbase. So that is very cool. We'll be looking at that very shortly. But on the subject of USB, the other thing you might have spotted is that on the Forte base, we do have a peripheral interface here with 6 USB-C ports, which you can use to connect any third-party peripheral that you want. So that is also omitted on the La Prima base, which again is a little bit disappointing. But again, remembering that they're trying to cut costs here without sacrificing build quality, something's got to go. And obviously it's better that something like that isn't necessarily necessary is omitted rather than, skimping out on quality materials or making the wheelbase even weaker to compensate. So for me, I'm happy to let that one slide, but I am disappointed that they don't include the provision for that emergency stop button. I do think that's something that should be included on a 12 Newton meter wheelbase. But otherwise, all the same observations that we had when we reviewed the Forte and Invicta wheelbases stand here. The build quality is really good. It does have a plastic shell here on the front and the back. One thing just to be aware of here, and again, we did cover this in detail in our Invicta review, is that you will need to remove the plastic cover on the front here to make way for their front mount if you want to use that. Now, one of the things that we mentioned in our initial reviews of the Invicta and Forte is that we thought that the mounting systems were maybe a little bit overly engineered and maybe a little bit too complex, and that something a little bit simpler might have been a better option. Now, I'm happy to say that in the time since, SimCore have actually released a funky little adapter plate which wedges in between the front housing here and the motor housing, exactly the same as Asetek's front mount. But you can see on this, we actually have some tapped M8 threads. That actually allows us to bolt the base directly to the SimCore mounting system, which you've seen us review separately. I'll link down in the description below for you. So that is actually compatible directly with the exact same mount that you can use for a Fanatec DD1 or DD2, or even a SimiCube 2 wheelbase too. So that I think is a much cleaner solution than Asetek's front mount, and definitely something that's worth considering if you're looking at one of these wheelbases. And if you're keen, there is even a funky boosted media edition available for these mounts too, if that is something that you might be interested in. So before we move on with the hardware here, let's just quickly talk about power supplies too. So you might remember the giant Forte brick that we looked at in the Forte review. That comes in at a rating of 48 volts output at 8.33 amps, which equates to 399.84 watts of power. The power supply that comes with the La Prima, although still very high quality, it actually has a thicker cable on it than we had with the Forte and Invicta bases, which is quite interesting. But this guy is rated at, again, 48 volts output, but only 3.75 amps or 180 watts maximum output. Now, one interesting thing here to note is that the pinouts between these two power supplies are identical. So pin 1, 2, and 3 are V+, and 4, 5, and 6 are V- on both of these. So that segues nicely into briefly touching on upgradability. Now, they have hinted that you'll be able to upgrade from the La Prima base to the Forte base without having to replace the entire base. Now, we do know that they're running the same motor for both the La Prima and the Forte base, so that would lead me to believe that it will be as simple as just upgrading the power supply and the internal electronics. Now, we don't know whether you'll be able to DIY that or have to send it in for an upgrade, but it's great to be able to have that possibility into the future. So almost done talking about the bases from a hardware perspective, but I also just want to quickly cover the quick release again for you. So what we have here is quite an interesting design. Looks very similar to the Simucube SQ1 quick release, but you can see here what we have is a little tab on the top here and a little 6-pin assembly on the bottom here, which I'll flip around so you can see a little bit better. So what these pins do is basically provide a USB interface through to whatever is on the other side. So you can plug in essentially any USB device into these pins, and it works essentially just like a generic USB hub, which then passes that data through to the PC. So what that means is that power and data is provided to the wheel directly through the wheelbase without the need for any sort of wireless communication or anything like that, like what we see on a lot of other wheelbases, which, look, in my experiences had been quite reliable with the vast majority of direct drive wheelbases. We did have a couple of issues many years ago, but nothing in current experience that's worth noting here. So when you mount the wheel, you've got this latch on the back here. Now, if you've seen our Invicta and Forte reviews, you'll remember that we did have a few issues with the spring being a little bit too loose here, which allowed us to actually pull the wheel off the base without pulling the lever. Happy to note that they have now rectified that situation. So they've put a much stiffer spring in there, which is still, you know, easy to operate, but it just makes it a lot more sturdy once mounted. So mounting the wheel is as simple as just pulling the tab and literally just dropping it on, releasing the tab, and that is now mounted and as solid can be, as you'll see later on when we get into the driving experience. To take the wheel off again, literally all you have to do is just pull that tab and the whole thing just comes away. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't arrived at the time of filming this video, but we will do a separate quick video for you guys as soon as we possibly can. We're gonna take you through their new quick release adapter as well, which is essentially just a 70mm bolt pattern. But what that also has is an integrated USB-A port. And what that means is that you're able to plug in any third-party wheel and have it run that's USB through the base here without the need for a cable directly connected to your PC. So that is something that I'm very excited to check out. They also are establishing a network of third-party wheel partners too. And what that means is a lot of wheels moving forward from third-party manufacturers will have Acertec compatible versions available, similar to what we see with Simucube at the moment. And that will have a compatible quick release here with a compatible pin assembly. So you don't even have to have a cable at all. It will literally drop on exactly the same way as this wheel does and just work, which is, again, very exciting and something that I'm really glad to see that they've done. So let's set the wheelbase aside now and get on into the steering wheel. So having a quick look at the La Prima wheel side by side with the Forte wheel now. And again, you can see what they've done here in terms of removing some features, but without sacrificing overall build quality. So when you look over the wheel, it has the exact same carbon fiber reinforced plastic or polymer material for the housing, which is extremely rigid. The same removable hand grips as well, which allow you to swap these out to replace them or swap them over to aftermarket units like what's available from Pineapple Grips, for example, very easily without the need to pull the entire wheel apart, which is really nice. We also do have the ability to add some analog paddles on the bottom here or additional paddles up the top if we wish to do so as well. Again, we covered that in our review of the Forte wheel, but just to give you the quick briefing here, they're literally just paddles which you bolt on. The Hall effect sensor is already built into the PCB on the wheel side, so it's literally just bolting in. There's no wiring that you need to do or anything like that. But yeah, look, overall, ergonomically, it just has a really good feel. Subjectively, you may or may not like the visual design. I don't think it's the sexiest wheel in the world personally, but that's a very personal thing. But I can tell you, very comfortable to hold in the hands. As you guys know, I'm not a huge fan of this rubberized material that they use on the grips, simply because it feels a little bit tacky in the hands and it does tend to be a dirt and debris magnet. You can see if we look over here at the Forte wheel all the dead skin cells and dirt and debris that it's picked up from driving with bare hands occasionally. And we've been using this wheel on one of our rigs for about 6 months now, just to give you the point of reference here. So you can see no wear and tear or anything like that to speak of. I'd say the wheel probably has a good 10-15 hours of use in it by now, if not maybe a little bit more. Not something that we've used to an extreme extent by any means, but yeah, it seems to be standing up as well as we would expect. But yeah, otherwise all the buttons and dials have a very, very nice feel to them. Again, exactly the same as what we have with the Forte wheel. There's no sacrifice in quality there at all. What you can see though is that they've made a couple of sacrifices in terms of just the overall finish to the wheel in the faceplate here. You can see carbon fiber on the Forte wheel and brushed aluminium, which still does actually look really nice on the La Prima wheel. It doesn't necessarily look any cheaper, I wouldn't say. But also, if you've got a keen eye, you'll notice the lack of flag LEDs on either side. On the Forte wheel, you've got 3 on either side, as well as programmable RGB LEDs above each one of the push buttons too. And then lastly, you'll see they've removed 4 of the thumb encoders compared to the Forte wheel, which again, it may or may not be something that you make use of. I do actually make heavy use of thumb encoders, so it's generally something that I preference. But look, in terms of what's here, everything is nice and high quality. We've got 2 7-way kinky switches, as they call them, not to be confused with the funky switch nomenclature that Fanatec uses, but up, down, left, right, push button and rotary encoder for each of these. And we'll run you through exactly how all these buttons and dials work later on when we take a quick look at the software. But yeah, absolutely nothing to complain about here at all in terms of the build quality of the wheel. The shifters have a really nice feel to them as well. They are magnetic, so you can see the little neodymium magnets there. And one thing that I really like about this shifter, and we commented on this on the Forte wheel, is despite how nice and clicky these feel, they're actually really quiet in operation compared to a lot of other wheels on the market too. So they've obviously spent their time here getting all these things dialed in and really sort of taking time to understand exactly what sim racers want and what's important to us. And yeah, I think it's a really, really high quality execution, especially when you consider how new they are to the market. Just little details like the foam inserts here on the paddles just damp that sound down. And yeah, overall, a very, very, very well presented wheel, I would say, for the money. Just again, to quickly pull up the Moza KS wheel for comparison. Now, look, I rated this wheel pretty highly. I think this actually does a really good job for the money. And there are a couple of features included on this wheel that you don't get with the La Prima wheel. So for example, we do have RGB LEDs for illumination in all of the push buttons here. And then on the back side, you can see we do have some analog paddles, which aren't an optional accessory. Those are actually included on the wheel. So from a pure functionality point of view, I would say that the Moza KS wheel probably does have a slight edge, but build quality and overall presentation wise, this just feels a little bit more toy-like, I would say, than the La Prima wheel does. It's a very subjective thing, but this carbon fiber finish, although it is very convincing, it is just a plastic housing here. And the La Prima wheel just does feel like a step up overall in quality over this, although there's nothing wrong with this particular wheel. It's definitely a very good wheel for the money. But yeah, when you compare the La Prima wheel to the Forte wheel, this doesn't necessarily strike me as a lower tier wheel or a cheaper wheel. The only reason for it being cheaper is simply just because they've removed some of the features compared to the Forte rather than it being a lower quality wheel overall. So yeah, good job with the wheel. Let's move on to the pedals. Okay, so super quick look at the pedals side by side here as well, just to give you the rundown on what the differences are between the two. Now, look, in terms of the overall driving experience, very, very, very similar to what we have with the Forte. Really, the only significant difference here is just in the presentation of the throttle. Now, if we turn it sideways, you can see here, the throttle assembly on the Forte pedal has this preload adjustment here, which allows us to adjust the preload of the pedal. So what that means is that the initial force required to push the pedal in is a little bit more, I guess, firm on this particular pedal, but it also, of course, gives us that adjustability as well if you wish to have that. Now, on the La Prima, you can see there is no such arm there. Now, that is one of the things that will be available in that upgrade kit should you wish to do it. So the way this pedal is actually functioning is it's purely just down to the return spring that you can see down in the bottom here. Now, I did find that it felt a little bit sloppy underfoot compared to the Forte pedal immediately. Now you can see there's quite a lot of dust on these Forte pedals. We run these Forte pedals quite a lot on one of our other rigs that we use here in the studio for testing and for when I'm racing VR, for example. So these pedals have had quite a lot of usage. I'd say probably well over 100 hours of usage now since we got them. And they've stood up really well, had absolutely no issues driving with them whatsoever. So yeah, initially I did notice the difference in the throttle, but I did adapt to it relatively quickly and it didn't have an impact on my pace overall. My lap times were exactly the same with these pedals as they were with these ones. So I would say that it's a sensible thing to remove to reduce the cost, but if you do prefer a stiffer throttle or you just want that ability to adjust the feeling of the throttle, then that is one thing that you're going to be sacrificing with the La Prima pedals over the Forte pedals. The only other functional difference here is the omission of the LED strip. You can see that's present here on the Forte, and again, that does have the ability, or will have the ability once the software is finalized, to react to telemetry data and things like that. So it's not purely just an aesthetic thing, it does have a functional purpose. That is one thing that they've removed on the La Prima pedals. They've just replaced that with a little tiny rubber strip. And then you'll notice as well, there's a nice machined finish on some of the aluminium here throughout, so on the pedal arms as well as just the base plate. So that's just purely an aesthetic thing, take it or leave it. Personally, I actually prefer the cleaner look of the black design here. I like my pedals to just kind of blend in with the rig and not stand out too much, so that's not an issue at all for me. But as we all know, the most important thing for a set of pedals to get right, in my opinion at least, is the brake. So you'll see here, both of these pedal sets are using the exact same load cell and mechanism for the brake. So if you want to know more about exactly what this is like to use, how it's adjusted and all those details, check out our Forte pedal review. That'll give you all the information you need to make the right decision here. But suffice to say for this video that this is a very stiff brake pedal. It's designed to replicate the feeling of the brake in a GT3 car, or at least that's the case according to Asetek, who do actually run a real life GT3 car in a real life championship series. So they should know what they're talking about there. But look, there is some adjustment there, and I actually really highly rate this brake pedal. I do prefer a stiffer brake pedal. But if you're wanting a ton of adjustability, or if you're on the side of preferring a softer pedal with a longer travel, then these might not be the best choice for you. But again, check out our Forte video for the full rundown on what you can expect from these pedals. So let's quickly go through the Asetek SimSports Race Hub software. Now, this software is going to be responsible for managing any Asetek SimSports hardware on your sim racing rig. So as they expand the ecosystem, you'll see the list on the left-hand side here expand also, and it's just showing up basically what's connected to your PC. So if we click on the settings tab here, you can see the various different devices which we've got connected to the PC, their firmware versions, serial numbers. We can make adjustments to some idle behavior here as well. So say we don't want to have the rainbow effect on the wheel, we can switch that off. We can also change how the software behaves when it's minimized too. There's a link directly to their online store here, as well as their online support. We've also got a game setup tab here, which is something I'm really happy to see. Most games you'll find now will just run straight out of the box with this gear. But if you do find an instance where something doesn't work, this tab here will run you through any necessary steps to get things up and running. And in my experience, this works really nicely. So no issues really to speak of here whatsoever. We have come across a couple of wheelbases in the past where you had to go in and manually change INI files and actually seek out the instructions to do so on the internet by yourself. Most manufacturers these days are getting pretty good at this. In particular, Moza have gotten quite good now. They have a very similar system to this as well. So I wouldn't say this is something that is particularly unique to Asetek, but something that's very good to see nonetheless here. So let's go through these items now on the left-hand side. So starting with the steering wheel. Now this will depend on obviously the steering wheel that you have connected or whether you've got their hub connected too. So if we take off the La Prima wheel, for example, and then drop on the Forte wheel, you'll see immediately it disappeared from the software and the Forte wheel will show up. Now you'll notice on the Forte wheel, we've got this array of buttons, and we can actually choose each individual button here and make adjustments to the color. If we go back to the La Prima wheel again, you'll see that they have omitted some of that functionality here, but we still have plenty of things that we can do. So none of these buttons have illumination, but you do have RGB illumination on these center dials. And you can see here we can change through all the various different colors. We can also choose between position-based or incremental. So if you're running a sim that supports multi-position switches, where the game actually knows the exact position that the switch is in, you can use that mode. Or if you need to use incremental or a standard pulse rotary encoder style switch, then you can do that as well. The advantage of multi-position switch being that the game remembers the position of the switch. So if you exit out and then go back in, engine map 2 doesn't then become engine map 1 and you're all out of whack. So not every single sim title supports multi-position switches, which is why it's a good idea to have both options available here. We can also adjust the master brightness here too. And of course you can switch each individual segment off if you wish to do so as well, just by turning off the color down here. And we can also make fine-tuning adjustments here to our shift lights too, so we can change the color of each individual segment and then also the threshold where they activate as well. And you can also choose if you want them to blink like what we're going to see here when you reach the maximum threshold, or whether you want it to just go up and down like so. And you can also have lights here to indicate pit limiter as well, which isn't going to show up, but you'll see that in the driving footage as we get going today. And then you can also adjust the orientation here as well, so you can go left to right as we see now, center to the middle like so, or side to center in that orientation. So pretty cool stuff here. All the basics that you would expect to see on a wheel at this price point, but good that it's all nice and easily accessible here. And quite intuitive as well. It's a very easy software package to use, quite approachable, doesn't seem overwhelming at face value, which is always a good thing. So lastly on the wheel page here, one more thing to point out is that we can also import and export profiles for the steering wheel too. So if you want to set up your LEDs differently for different cars, maybe your shift point is a little bit different, you can make those adjustments and save them and import them or send them to your friends as well, which is always a good thing to see. So let's skip past wheelbase for now and go to the pedals. Again, you can see it's all very nicely integrated in the one software package here, so we don't have to open multiple pieces of software to get things going. So a very simple calibration process here. If you're wanting more information on how exactly I recommend you set up load cell or pressure-based pedals, we actually have a dedicated video for exactly that, which I'll link down in the description below, so definitely check that out if you're wanting more info here. But just to quickly run you through the process here, to calibrate the throttle, you click on calibrate, you push the pedal all the way down to the maximum threshold and release it again. Obviously, I'm not wearing the right type of shoes for driving at the moment, but that doesn't really matter. We click complete, and then we are good to go with the throttle. Then in a similar manner with the brake here, click calibrate, push to the maximum amount of pressure that you would ever want to have to put in for absolute panic braking, and then release it again. So basically that's just a threshold point plus a little bit, and then we click on complete. Now you may notice here we have an adjustment for our top and bottom dead zones too. So what I would generally recommend is you want to have a little bit of a dead zone on the throttle. You can see here by default we've got a 2%. That just means that if you're not quite pushing the pedal to 100%, or in the case that the calibration of the Hall effect sensor slightly slips out, which has never happened to me on any Acertec pedals, and I have been running them for 18 months now on the rig. But just in case that were to ever happen, it's just ensuring that you're always reaching that 100% throttle point. And the bottom dead zone just means that if you have a habit of resting your foot on the pedal ever so slightly, it's not going to register any input unless you push it past a certain threshold. Generally not so important on the throttle, but if you have a habit of resting your foot on the brake like I do, then you're definitely going to want to have a little bottom dead zone. But again, check out our full detailed video for more details on exactly how I recommend you set up these pedals. We also have the ability for non-linear mapping here as well. So if you want to set a non-linear response curve here, you can do that too for both the brake and the throttle. And if you add on the clutch pedal, that will obviously show up in here as well. And then lastly, we also have the ability to save and import profiles, just like what we saw with the steering wheel before. So if you want to set up different profiles for different cars or share them with your mates, you can do that as well. So let's jump onto the wheelbase now. So we've got a nice clean visual representation of all the hardware here on the screen. We can set our center calibration from here, actually already calibrated, but it's as simple as that. Just click and then save to wheelbase. And then we can make adjustments to our torque from the next screen. We do have a couple of pre-cooked in presets here. They also are making presets available on their website now too. You might have noticed they just released some F1 presets which were created by Kevin Magnussen, which is really cool. So you can check those out. But if you want to create your own preset, obviously you can do that too. We've just got a test preset here, which I've been fiddling around with. So we've got all of our usual suspects here. I'm not going to take you through every single setting here and exactly what it does. They do have nice tool tips on every single one of these, so you can go through and read these for yourselves. But all the important stuff that I would expect on a wheelbase, again, at this price point is all here. And again, I really like the way this is all presented. You could argue that Moza, for example, has a little bit more in terms of adjustment here. You might have seen in our R12 review recently, linked down in the description, they have the ability to actually fine tune per individual frequency range or frequency band to really dial in the force feedback. But in my experience using the La Prima, the Forte and the Invicta bases, the amount of detail that we get here without needing to insert a lot of additional filtering is actually really, really exceptionally great. And we'll get into that when we talk about driving in just a minute. But all the usual suspects, as I said, adjustments for damping, friction and inertia here. Those are all going to influence how the wheel actually feels mechanically connected to the car and how much detail is actually coming through the wheel. Steering range here can be wound all the way up to 1440 degrees. So if you're doing truck sims or something like that, there's plenty of adjustment there too. Bump stop hardness and range just adjust how the bump stops feel at either side. There's an adjustment here for high frequency limit. So if you're finding that things just feel a little bit too grainy, you can wind that down too. And then just your usual things here with regards to acceleration, overall force, anti-oscillation's another important one as well. But if you check out our Invicta review, again linked down in the description, I went through all of this in a lot more detail. Another thing that I do like here is they also do have a basic mode. Now this is going to overwrite my settings, but this was just a random thing that I threw together anyway, so this isn't a proper preset. So you can see this just simplifies things down and makes it, again, even more accessible than it was previously. So if you want the best possible experience out of the base, then it's worth taking the time to understand what all of these advanced settings mean. But if you're just wanting to jump in and drive, then this does a perfectly good job. But I do like the fact that they've made it as approachable as possible. We've got a tab here for safety as well, so we can make a couple of adjustments to things like centering strength and hands-off detection. And then under notifications, we can turn off the beeping sounds that it makes under different circumstances as well, which I actually normally do. And then once again, just like what we saw with steering wheel and pedals, we can save, import, and export presets here as well, which is a really nice thing to be able to do. So overall, personally, I think they've done a really good job at the presentation of the software. All the things that are most important are all here to fine-tune the driving experience. Just a couple of things that I do notice that are lacking here compared to other brands' alternatives, so we do need to call that out. There is no mobile app at this point in time, so you can't make adjustments from your mobile device. You will have to Alt-Tab out. You also can't make adjustments on the fly from the wheel either, like what we see with a lot of other ecosystems these days. I'm sure these are things that can be integrated at a software and firmware level later on down the track, but as it stands right now, you will have to Alt-Tab to make adjustments in the software rather than being able to make those adjustments on the fly from your phone or from the wheel itself. The other thing that I'm really hoping we do see them integrate as well is a deeper level of community profile integration. So like with the SimuCube ecosystem, for example, you actually have the ability there to go in and choose different people's profiles which are loaded in the cloud, and then you can experiment with them and duplicate them and fine tune them for your own personal preference too. At the moment, you can obviously download, as we saw, and import other profiles. We mentioned the Kevin Magnussen profiles for F1, which was just recently released, but you can't just go into an online cloud-based system like you can with SimuCube and choose different people's profiles to experiment with. So there are definitely a few areas that we can see them expand and improve on here, but overall, I think it does a pretty darn good job. Let's move on now, talk about the driving experience. Okay, so driving experience with the La Prima bundle. Let's start off by talking about the pedals. They're probably the simplest thing to explain here, and then we'll unpack the wheel and the base in more detail, do some comparisons there too. So look, these pedals pretty much drive in a very similar fashion to the Forte pedals which we reviewed previously. So the main difference that you feel here is just in the sensation using the throttle pedal. There's a little bit less spring force in the return, and obviously you don't have that adjustability in terms of preload there either. Now, I was able to adjust the throttle pedal just fine. I was just as fast with these pedals as I was with the Forte pedals, which I guess is probably the most important thing here. So yeah, look, I think that they definitely do the job, and I like the idea of being able to upgrade to the Forte based system with that, with those additional components later on, should you wish to do so as well. I don't care for things like LED lighting. I would more than happily save the money and not have those features. So I think that's a good option as well. And I really like what they've done here with the philosophy of having the same core componentry when it comes to what's most important, which is the brake, as the Forte pedals, but just at a cheaper price point. And it is significantly cheaper than what you're paying for the Forte pedals. So look, in terms of flex and things like that, rigidity, absolutely fine, and probably the best pedals that I've ever tested at this kind of price point in terms of that overall material and build quality, sturdiness, things like that. But these pedals definitely aren't for everybody. When we reviewed the Invicta pedal, which actually feels very similar, but much more expensive, being a hydraulic-based system, that was the first time I'd ever kind of been, I guess, forced into having a stiff pedal. It was a real sort of change in muscle memory and philosophy in braking. And once I got my head around it, I actually found that I was faster than I'd ever been before. Whenever you change a brake pedal, there's always going to be a learning curve involved. You're always going to be initially slower than you were originally until you find that extra pace and that extra consistency. So these pedals aren't going to suit everybody. It is a stiff pedal. I would encourage you to, you know, if you own a set of pedals that are adjustable, try setting them up a little bit stiffer and see how they feel to you. But if you're after a pedal that you can adapt to a lot of different types of driving, if you want to be able to make it feel authentically like a street car and then make it feel like a, you know, F1 car with a really stiff pedal, then these pedals probably aren't going to be the right pedal for you. What I would suggest at around this kind of, I guess, point in the market would probably be something more like the Fanatec CSL Elite V2 pedals, which do include a clutch as well. Those those are absolutely fantastic pedals, and I have absolutely no issues at all recommending them. I think they do an absolutely fantastic job for the price point. These are excellent as well. I just don't think that they're going to suit as wide a variety of people as something like the CSL Elite V2s do. So it's a bit of an awkward one, because I think that in terms of nailing the fundamentals as to what's important in a set of pedals, this is probably a better pedal set, but I think the Fanatec CSL Elite V2s are going to be suitable for a wider variety of customers, I guess, is probably the best way I can summarize that. But if you're comparing these pedals to something like the Moza CRP pedals, then yeah, I would definitely put these above something like that. And yeah, so I think you're getting a very, very good set of pedals for the money at this kind of price point in the bundle. But just do keep in mind that the philosophy with these pedals is a little bit more specific than what you're getting with some of those other options. So if you want to have that adaptability and adjustability, then these might not be the right pedals for you. So let's quickly touch on the La Prima steering wheel next before we get into the characteristics of the driving experience of the wheelbase. So look, this wheel has actually really impressed me. I wasn't sure how I would feel about it going into it. Look, subjectively, I'm not a huge fan of the look of these Asetek wheels. Same goes for the Forte wheel as well. I'm not a big fan of the orange, and I just find that they look a little bit, not necessarily toy-like, but just a little bit, I guess, over the top in terms of unnecessary curves, and they're just not really sleek and streamlined looking like some of the other wheels that we've tested over the years. It's hard to put my finger on exactly what it is, but from a purely objective point of view, I think they've done a really good job here. For the price point, you know, it's rigid. You've got replaceable grips as well, so if they wear out, you can replace them, or you can swap them for aftermarket options. I know Pineapple Grips have already got some aftermarket options available for these. You've got the nice high quality brushed aluminium finish on the face here. I do believe that that is just a thin insert that they put in over the top of the reinforced plastic polymer housing, but it's perfectly rigid. It's absolutely as solid as a rock in that regard. There's no issues at all with flex or anything like that. The shifters and everything feel really nice, as well as we touched on earlier on in the video. And all in all, I think they've done a really good job. The one thing that I really don't like about this wheel, and I know that it's a sacrifice that they're making at the price point, and it ties in with the philosophy of, you know, removing features rather than removing build quality, but I really don't like having blank plates where features have been removed. It kind of reminds me of when you buy the cheapest model of a range of a car, and you know, every time you get in the car, you see all the blank switch panels where the switches would be if you bought the more expensive model. And it's exactly the same with this as well. If you have a look at the Forte next to it, you can see all the things that you're missing out on with this wheel. It would have been much nicer if these parts were just flat and didn't sort of scream at you that you were missing on something. But then the price would be more expensive because they'd have to have a different mold, and you know, I can totally appreciate the reasons why they've done it this way. Let's quickly talk about the quick release too. Now, we were a little bit on the fence about Asetek's quick release when we did the Forte and Invicta reviews, believe it or not, it was 6 months ago now. We were a little bit concerned about the fact that we were able to pull the wheel up and actually pull the wheel directly off the quick release without releasing the little tab. Now, since we did that review, they have revised the spring in these. They actually pulled them from the shelves and made an adjustment to the design on the fly, which I was actually really impressed with. And they now have a much stiffer spring in here, and I'm not able to pull that wheel off anymore, which is really great. The quick release works really well. So you just pull the lever and there's no force required to lift the wheel. It literally just comes straight off, and then to drop it back on, it's very similar as well. You just drop it on and you're good to go like so. So no flex in that whatsoever, no twisting, no play or slop or anything like that. Just a really, really solid quick release design. As I said, I had my reservations. I wasn't 100% convinced on it, but it seems to be standing the test of time so far. And yeah, honestly, if this had been my first experience, I wouldn't be able to fault it. So I'd say, in fairness, they've done a really, really good job here. So let's move on now and talk about the characteristics of the wheelbase. Now, when I went into this review, what I was hoping to experience was that this would basically drive like a Forte wheelbase with its balls cut off. And I'm happy to say that that's pretty much exactly what the experience has been like here. If you dial down the Forte base to the same force feedback level as what this is producing, so 12 Newton meters, then to me at least, the differences between the two were pretty much indiscernible. Now, when we did our comparison between the Forte and the Invicta, I was able to notice a subtle difference just in the overall sensation of responsiveness and detail between those two bases. When I test the La Prima and the Forte back to back, even though the Forte does have that slightly higher slew rate, in a blind test, I can't tell the difference between the two. So, you know, I'm just one person. There may be people out there that feel differently, and I'm certainly not saying that they're wrong. But to me, at least, at the same force feedback levels, absolutely the same. So if you're happy to operate at that 12 Newton meter mark, then I absolutely think that this is a fantastic choice. What the real advantage of the Forte at 18 Newton meters over the 12 Newton meter we get with the La Prima is really just that extra headroom, that extra dynamic range. So if you're the sort of person that wants to have your crash effects and those really sharp details feel extremely strong, but still retain that detail in the lower sort of force feedback, like road texture, things like that, then that extra dynamic range may be useful to you. The force feedback levels that I run here, I usually run sort of 12 to 14 Newton meters on my Simucube 2 Ultimate that I drive daily. I have my dynamic range generally capped at 14 Newton meters. So even the strongest forces of crashing into a wall or something like that will be capping out at 14 Newton meters. So to me, anything stronger than that and I'm likely to injure myself. And I start to get into a situation where I feel like the car's driving me rather than me driving the car, which is obviously detrimental to driving quickly and consistently. So yeah, for me, and I can only speak for myself, 12 Newton meters that we have here would be absolutely fine. And the differences in the detail and responsiveness here, to me at least, were indistinguishable between the La Prima and the Forte at the same force feedback level. Again, reiterating that if we step up to the Invicta, I do notice the difference in the slew rate. I do notice that slight increase in responsiveness. Now, just while we're talking about force feedback strength here, I just wanted to highlight something which I personally thought was really interesting. So as I mentioned earlier on in the video, Acertec actually had Kevin Magnussen develop some profiles for their wheelbases for use with Formula One style cars to create the most authentic feeling F1 experience in terms of the forces you're feeling through the wheel, true to real life. So in his settings, what he did was he actually ran the torque limit on the base set to maximum, like what we did in the review here. So 12 Newton meter for the La Prima, 18 for the Forte, and 27 for the Invicta. But interestingly, in his Assetto Corsa settings, he's suggesting running the La Prima at 80% gain, 60% for the Forte, and 40% for the Invicta. Now, they describe this as being below 100% just to make sure that you're avoiding clipping. But it's interesting that he's obviously, the fact that he's dialing down the force feedback even further on the Forte and even further still on the Invicta would kind of indicate to me that a realistic feel for him is around that kind of 10 to 12 Newton meter mark, which is pretty much exactly where the La Prima base is sitting. So I just thought that was interesting. Read into that whatever you want. But yeah, to me, I've never driven a real life Formula One car. So if we're going to compare this to some other options available in the market as well, the most obvious ones would be the Moza R12, which we reviewed just recently, and the SimMagic Alpha Mini. Both of these sit at a similar kind of torque level. The Alpha Mini at 10 Newton meters and the R12 at 12 Newton meters, exactly the same as what we have here. Now, I can't speak to the experience using the Alpha Mini, so you'll have to do your own research there. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to review one of those pretty soon. That is something that I'm working on in the background, so hopefully we'll have some news for you there pretty soon. But I have used the R12 extensively, and we did review it right here on the channel just recently as well. Now, I can tell you the experience using the R12 is very good. The R12 is a little bit cheaper if you bundle it with the KS wheel than what you have here with the La Prima wheel and wheelbase bundle. But I do feel like the extra money is worth it in this case. I feel like with the Moza stuff, there is a little bit more sacrifice in terms of detail. And one of the things I commented on in that review was that they have made some progress in terms of not needing quite as much filtering to get a good feel overall out of the base. But one of the observations I had with the Forte and Invicta was that they required very, very minimal filtering, less filtering than I've ever experienced with any other wheelbase, including wheelbases like VRS and my Simucube 2 as well. So what that means is that you're getting all of the detail out of the game without the need to run filters over the top to get rid of things like roboticness or notchiness and things like that. So the result is you get a very, very authentic, sharp and responsive feel out of this wheelbase. And that, in my opinion at least, does make the overall experience of using this just that step higher than what you get with the Moza R12. So I would spend the extra money for this over the R12, but if the best you can afford is the R12, then that is an absolutely excellent product as well. So I'm certainly not saying that it's bad, I just think that this is better. Really what I think it boils down to at this point in time is if you're after the best possible force feedback experience at the lowest possible price, then it's a pretty close race between something like this and the VRS Direct Force Pro wheelbase, which again, we have reviewed here on the channel, links down in the description below. Their ecosystem is a little bit more clumsy than what we have here. Their software isn't quite as well refined. They do still have a few, at least at the time of recording this, we did actually run their base just about a week ago in testing. So at that point, it is still a little bit glitchy. Occasionally you get the odd funny bit of force feedback effect, or little things like that, which are things that they're going to be able to iron out ultimately with firmware and software updates. But having said that, that product has been out for quite some time now, and it does still have those little glitches. I've got to say, with the Asetek gear, given how young it is, given how new they are to the market, it really is quite amazing just how well refined everything is. We haven't had any of those kinds of issues with glitches. We did have a few hardware issues with the initial Invicta base, which we covered in that review, but beyond that, we haven't had any issues with the overall actual experience of using the product. So I've been thinking long and hard about the best way to summarize this experience, and thinking back through all the things that I've learned over the years of testing out all the different hardware that we've tested here. And I guess comparing what I would do now with my own money to what I would have done a couple of years ago. And I think if you'd asked me 3 or 4 years ago, I probably would have gone and bought myself a Simucube 2 Pro. I don't think I would have stretched as far as the Ultimate. I've always said, since I got the Ultimate base, which was actually my first direct drive wheelbase, was very grateful that that Simucube sent that to me to review and use. But I've always maintained that ever since I compared that to my experience with the Pro, I couldn't justify the extra expense of the Ultimate over the Pro. And I think what I've learned in the time since then is that every wheelbase that I've used, regardless of how powerful it is, I've always ended up, after I've kind of tested it to its extents and what it's capable of, I've always ended up winding it back to that sort of 12 to 14 Newton meter mark. And knowing that now and understanding that, things like responsiveness and, sharpness in the detail is more important to me personally than that overall strength, I would have a really hard time going past this. I think if I was spending my own money and I was being conscious of, trying to get the absolute best value for money when it comes to the things that are most important to me, that being enough strength in the force feedback, which we've established 12 to 14 Newton meters is for me personally, but just getting that raw detail, the good experience, the good software, no glitches in terms of performance, consistency across sim titles as well. At this point in time, I don't think that I could go past this bundle. I love the fact that they're expanding the ecosystem as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing exactly what comes out when it comes to those third-party wheels that we've described, at least in principle. I'm sure that we'll be getting our hands on some of those to test relatively soon as well, so that's very exciting. But look, the ecosystem is still in its early days. It is still a relatively immature ecosystem. But when you plug in all those different parameters, for me personally, I feel like this does hit the sweet spot. I think this is the best value for money when it comes to just providing that overall excellent build quality, excellent driving experience at a reasonable price point. So there are cheaper options, and I do think that the Moza R12, is a very, very good option there. But for me, just with those little details that are lacking in the Moza force feedback, the additional filtering that's required, and just some of the glitchiness in the software, which I do think still needs a little bit of work, I do think that this is the better overall experience, and I do think that it's worth that little bit of extra money, at least it is to me. So I really hope that today's video has helped you out, guys. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Make sure you check out all those other products and the reviews that we've done of them down in the description down below. And if you decide you want to pick up any of the gear that we've discussed in today's video, we do have the links down in the description, which are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you. So I think that pretty much covers everything. If you do own one of these bundles, let us know what you think down in the description below as well. Always valuable to get your experiences. And thanks very much for watching, guys. I'll see you again soon. Bye.